Good afternoon. At this afternoon's Who Are You podcast for Intelligence Forums, we're privileged to have Martin Towers. Martin has had a very successful portfolio career and is still involved in angel investing and the world of business. And I'm going to start by asking Martin to talk about his professional journey to where he is today. Martin, thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm going to let you answer that question. Thank you.
Thank you, Harry, and good afternoon. I am a chartered accountant by background, by training, and left the profession and went into industry and took on a number of finance director roles, primarily of public companies. Culminating in Kelder, which was a FTSE 100 PLC. Whereafter, and once Kelder was taken over, I went plural. And as you do, you start sort of chairing audit committees. And then I aspired to and became chairman of certain other PLCs, which I did. And then having given that up, because the 9-year rule, etc., I now assist a family business in its growth pattern. And as Harry mentioned, I am an EIS investor in some startup businesses.
In your early professional career, what part of it had the most profound effect on your success story?
Sure. One company in particular, one person in particular, it's a company called Ward White, and the name of the guy, the chief exec of Ward White at the time, was one Philip Birch. This was the first move I made out of the profession into industry in my early 30s. And I was lucky. I lived in Northamptonshire. Ward White was a small footwear manufacturer in that area, cobblers, and Philip Birch was the new chief exec, and was lucky to get access to Philip because we ran a decentralized structure, a small head office team. Our head office was a country house in the middle of nowhere in Northamptonshire, and from there we transformed a almost dying, really, footwear manufacturing business into a specialty retail business, and then away from footwear retailing into other areas of retailing. Halfords was our most successful acquisition from Burma Castrol, and that gave me access to a lot of things happening. I got experience I probably shouldn't have had in the 30s as part of a small team, a decentralized structure, international business, access to the city, contested takeovers, all very exciting stuff. And ultimately, Ward White was bought by Boots in a contested 900 million takeover. And I learned so much from Philip in terms of how to run a business successfully, the federated, the decentralized structure concept, as opposed to central command and control, which I encountered in spades in Boots at the end. And it's about giving people responsibility. It's about giving people accountability. It's about, if you pay peanuts, you get monkeys, things like that. That in those days were the ingredients for a successful and rapidly growing business that was widely appreciated as such, quite an aggressive company, a young company, but which had a strategy and which had a communication process. And once you've got strategy and once you've got a communication, if you've got the right culture, then you're on the road to success. Of course, culture, of course, being the most significant factor of all those features.
In your experience, would you like to share what are the key ingredients that make a good board work?
Good question. I'm going to start that answer that question by talking about the unitary board. Now, listeners may or may not be aware that in the UK we run the unitary board system, which is relatively unusual and not necessarily copied throughout Europe or the USA. And in the unitary board, what you have are the executive directors and the non-executive directors on the same board, sitting around the same table. That doesn't always happen elsewhere, where they have a supervisory board frequently and a management board, two quite separate people on them. There's a remoteness there, particularly amongst the supervisory board. The point about the unitary board is if you can get it to work, if you can get these non-exec directors and the executive directors singing off the same hymn sheet, then that, I believe, is the most successful ingredient for a board. The second thing, of course, is that you need, if you've got the structure, you need an excellent chairperson. All roads then subsequently lead to the chair. If you've not got a very good chair, it won't work, because all sorts of things can go wrong, from politics to poor capital allocation, etc., etc. So a strong leading chairman who can create a board such that it's of itself gives a competitive advantage, that the whole is more than the sum of the parts. That's what you're seeking. Doesn't always happen, of course. Easier said than done. But if you can get those sort of ingredients going, the gender mix is very important as well. The statistics are all out there at the moment for the number of female CEOs there aren't in the UK and elsewhere, declining numbers, etc. I'm a big believer in getting the gender mix right. And the fourth point I'd make is don't make the board too big. If you've got a board of 15 people, it won't work. You need to keep the numbers as small as possible and only include people who make a real contribution.
Obviously, you've worked with some very large businesses and lately some smaller businesses. In
Yeah.
your experience, what do small businesses most need to move on a notch?
Capable management and leadership is usually the ingredient I find. You will come across people who have perhaps been with a small business right from the very beginning, right from the very start, and done a good job, but they've frankly taken it as far as they can. They reach a ceiling, and that can be unfortunate, but it's often a fact. And you have to be able to, the board, the leadership has to evolve. It has to now be able to run a growing business, a business that's bigger than it was. And that usually means different structures as well. The leading lights can't do everything. They need to delegate. That can be tricky, can be tough if they've been used to doing every single thing themselves. So I would say capable leadership and management, and an ability for the business to evolve as it grows. And what you can find is that smaller businesses frequently don't really realize or understand what they need to do. This is the almost sometimes the point, particularly entrepreneurial people who perhaps think they know it all, and don't. They're the ones who sometimes present the biggest challenge, when you start to say, well, we need to do this in a bit more of a disciplined or a regularized sort of way, and they balk at actually doing that. You can talk about access to finance as well, situations like that. The other thing I'd say is that the biggest handicap can sometimes be a lack of understanding of what's going on around them, in terms of the macro environment, the macro conditions, the world they live in, what's going on elsewhere, because they haven't quite got the time, the inclination, the experience to understand what's going on in the big wide world outside.
The next question is not a politically loaded gun, but if you were Chancellor, how would you get some growth in the UK economy?
Well, it's a difficult question. I mean, to get growth from a businessman's point of view, if you step back, if you want to get growth in a business, what you want from government in particular is a kind of a benign environment, low interest rates, low inflation, not interventionist. those sort of attributes that basically enable you to get on with it, as it were, without unnecessary undue influence, or interference, I beg your pardon. The problem you've got at the moment with this government, as we have it at the moment, is the complete lack of incentive to grow and develop a business, mainly because of high taxation and the ever tentacles of taxation spreading into all areas. And the uncertainty things like the last budget created for a long, long time, and a lack of confidence. You need confidence. Business needs confidence. We as individuals need confidence to spend. And unfortunately, the way this government has gone about its business in the last second half of last year, with all the uncertainty ahead of the budget, plus this constant stream of U-turns, has not given people confidence at all. So you actually need, with government, people who don't get involved any more than they have to, who do provide a framework within which there is the incentive to invest. Which for many companies there isn't at the moment, because either positively there isn't the incentive because of higher taxation, or a general uncertainty. You don't know what's going to happen next. So it's not a healthy backdrop we've got at the moment, I'm afraid, and generally further not helped by, I don't think this government has got any business experience in it at all in terms of dealing with those kind of issues. Its only business experience probably comes from the trade union angle, that sort of side of things, which frankly is not helpful.
Thank you for answering it so precisely, that question. So that leads me to the last question, which may be related to the previous question, and that is, what opportunities and headwinds do you see for the UK in the next year or two?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question because, and I was talking about this with the company I'm assisting earlier this week in terms of looking ahead and budgeting for the next financial year. There's no doubt that the general backdrop in 2026 is going to be tough in the same way that 2025 was. The geopolitical situation remains as unclear and uncertain as ever. You just simply don't know what's going to happen, and it's outside your control anyway. So, there's nothing much you can do about that. So I think one has to be realistic in terms of what is going to happen in terms of running the business. Having said that, there's no doubt, this is what I was saying to some of our guys earlier this week, that these difficult trading conditions will nevertheless throw up opportunities. It will throw up opportunities against the weaker brethren. If you've got a strong balance sheet, if you're well prepared, you know what you're doing, then you are going to be able to take market share. The market itself might not be growing, but you may well be able to pick up market share because a number of your competitors may well be in an even more difficult position than actually you find yourself. And this could lead to both organic growth and it could lead to inorganic growth. In other words, growth by acquisition as well, because there may well be some of your competitors and companies who are moving into distress in these difficult conditions. Maybe they're small businesses and they've got this management bandwidth problem, or possibly a retiring family sort of problem. And situations like this will emerge. That you might well be able to take advantage of, possibly slightly opportunistically, but nevertheless those opportunities might well be there. So it's not kind of all bad news, as it were. I think the general economic backdrop might get slightly better as the year wears on. We get a couple of interest rate cuts, etc. But I think it's going to be marginal, and people are going to be looking to 27 and 28 before there is any potential scope for improvement. But having said that, the world is such a volatile and uncertain place at the moment. It's very difficult and would be foolish to predict anything with too much certainty just right now.
Martin Towers, thank you so much for this interview. It's deeply appreciated. And I'd also like to thank Christina Czech, who engineered the meeting. Thank you.
My pleasure.